It was a bright Saturday morning, the kind where the world feels just a little softer, like it's wrapped in a warm blanket. The kind of morning where you crave iced coffee, sunshine on your face, and the gentle hum of people chatting around you. We were sitting outside our favorite little café, the one with the crooked tables and the perfect almond croissants. I wore my Smash the Patriarchy tank, not as a statement, just because it was laundry day and it was clean. But maybe that's where things started to unravel. He was quiet. Too quiet for a man who usually couldn't stop making bad puns and ranting about sports. His eyes were distant, and I could tell something was brewing. I thought maybe he had a tough week at work, or maybe he was about to tell me he loved me. Funny how you can be so wrong in moments like that. I remember stirring my coffee, trying to cut through the awkward silence with a joke. I said, "You look like you're about to confess to murder. Should I be worried?" He didn't laugh. Instead, he looked at me right in the eyes and said, "There's something I need to talk to you about." My heart sank. You know that moment when everything goes still? That was it. The clinking of spoons, the sound of the espresso machine, the distant chatter, they all faded for a second. It was just me, him, and that awful sentence sitting between us. He said, "I've been thinking a lot lately about our future, about what it would mean to get married. And I don't think I can marry someone who calls herself a feminist." I blinked. I didn't know if I misheard or if this was some kind of weird joke. So I asked, "What do you mean?" And he repeated it. Slower this time. "I don't want to marry a feminist." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I didn't know what else to do. "You mean like, you don't want to marry me? Or you don't want to marry the idea of feminism?" He shrugged. "Same thing." I felt something shift in my chest. A tiny crack, just big enough to let the confusion rush in. I said, "You knew who I was when we started dating. You knew what I believed in. Why is this suddenly a problem?" He looked uncomfortable, fidgeted with his coffee cup. "Back then, it was cute. You were passionate, outspoken, but now, it just feels like everything's a fight, like you're always trying to prove a point. Can't we just be a couple without turning everything into a statement?" That hit harder than I thought it would. Because to him, my values were noise, a performance, a phase, not something deeply woven into who I am. I said, "So standing up for myself and for other women is a phase to you?" He looked away. "It's just exhausting. I want peace. I want a relationship where I don't feel like I'm constantly being judged for being a man." I stared at him. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't recognize the person sitting across from me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my coffee at the ground and shatter the silence. But all I could do was say, "That's not feminism. That's just you feeling uncomfortable being held accountable." The people around us had started to quiet down. I could feel eyes on us, like the cafe itself was holding its breath. But I didn't care. This wasn't about them. This was about the man I thought I'd spend my life with suddenly saying he couldn't handle who I really was. He sighed. A long, tired sigh. "I'm not trying to be the bad guy. I don't want to live in a constant debate." I said, "Then maybe you don't want a partner. Maybe you just want someone who agrees with everything you say." He looked hurt, but he didn't deny it. And that was worse than yelling. Worse than any insult he could have thrown. Because it meant he'd already made up his mind. He said, "I think we should take some space. Figure out if we're really compatible." Space. That word always feels like the beginning of the end. I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I didn't know how to fight for someone who didn't want to fight for me. I picked up my phone, my coffee, left the croissant untouched. I stood up, heart pounding in my chest, and said, "I didn't change. You just never saw me clearly." As I walked away, I heard someone at the next table whisper, "Wow." I didn't turn around. I didn't need an audience. I needed air. Sat in my car for 20 minutes before I could even start the engine. My hands were shaking. Not from anger, but from heartbreak. How do you grieve something that's still technically alive? We weren't officially broken up, but something broke, and I knew it wouldn't be the same again. That morning started with coffee and croissants. It ended with the slow, quiet end of a relationship I thought was unshakable. All because I dared to believe that being a woman with a voice was not too much. But in that moment, I realized maybe he was right about one thing. We weren't compatible, because I would never stop being loud, proud, and unapologetically myself. And if that made me too much for him, then maybe he was never enough for me. It had only been 3 days since that awful brunch, and everything still felt like a raw nerve. I didn't text him. He didn't call. We were in that cold, echoing limbo that comes right before the breakup you're too afraid to say out loud. And honestly, I wasn't sure if I was sad or angry. Maybe both. Maybe neither. Maybe I was just tired. But then he messaged me. Just one line. "Can we talk?" And despite everything, I said yes. We met at the same café. I don't know why. Maybe we were both hoping we could rewind time somehow. Sit at the same table, sip the same coffee, and pretend we never had that conversation. But the moment I saw him, I knew we couldn't go back. He was already sitting there, elbows on the table, scrolling through his phone like it wasn't the end of the world. I walked up, heart pounding again, same as last time, and sat down. No hug, no smile. Just a quiet, "Hey." He looked up, nodded, and said, "Thanks for coming." I shrugged. "You wanted to talk. So talk." He looked like he was trying to find the right words, or maybe trying to make sure I didn't explode again. He said, "I didn't mean to make you feel small the other day. I don't feel heard in this relationship." That word again, heard. I told him, "You feel unheard because I don't agree with you. That's not the same thing." He shook his head. "It's not just about that. It's like every conversation we have turns into a debate. Every time I say something, you challenge it. Can't you just listen sometimes?" I felt this heat rise in my chest. Because that's the thing. I do listen. I have listened. I've spent years softening my voice, choosing gentler words, walking on eggshells to make sure he felt safe. But the second I pushed back, politely, firmly, confidently, I became too much. So I said, "I do listen. But I'm not going to sit quietly and let things slide just to make you comfortable." He leaned back, arms crossed again. Same posture as before. That defensive wall going up. It's not about comfort, it's about respect. That's when something inside me cracked. I leaned forward and asked him, "And you think calling me too political and saying you can't marry a feminist is respectful?" He didn't answer. Just looked down at his coffee like maybe the foam would rescue him from this moment. And then something shifted. A voice from the table next to us suddenly chimed in. "I'm sorry," the woman said, clearly trying to be polite. But I couldn't help overhearing. "I just want to say, feminism isn't about disrespecting men. It's about equality." I looked at her surprised. She smiled gently, like she'd been holding it in. Her friend beside her nodded. And suddenly, it was like the whole cafe was tuned in again, just like last time. He looked around, clearly embarrassed. "Can we not do this here? I didn't come for a public debate." I laughed, and it wasn't a nice laugh. It was the kind of laugh that slips out when you've just had enough. You're the one who wanted to talk here. Don't act like I dragged you into this. He lowered his voice. This is exactly what I mean. Everything becomes a scene. I snapped back. It's not a scene, it's the truth. And the truth isn't always convenient. There was this heavy silence after that. Like even the espresso machine paused to take a breath. And then he said something I didn't expect. He said, "Maybe I'm not strong enough to be with a woman like you." It hit me like a punch I never saw coming. I asked, "What does that even mean?" He looked genuinely torn. "It means you don't need me, and maybe that scares me." I sat back, stunned, because for a moment, it wasn't anger I felt. It was sorrow. Deep, aching sorrow for the boy in front of me, who mistook equality for rejection, who believed love only worked when one person needed saving. I said, "I don't need you to rescue me, but I wanted to build something with you, not behind you, not beneath you, beside you." He looked up at me, eyes softer now, but still unsure. "I don't know how to be that man." And I said, "Then maybe you're not ready for a woman like me." The air between us felt cold, even in the heat of the afternoon sun. The woman from earlier leaned over again and whispered, "Good for you," and I smiled. Not at her, not at him, just at the fact that I'd finally said what I needed to say. He reached for his wallet, trying to pay for both drinks, but I stopped him. "No, this one's on me. Call it the cost of clarity." He didn't argue. We stood up at the same time. He looked at me like he wanted to say something more. Maybe something kind. Maybe something to pull it all back. But no words came. Just silence. And then he walked away. I sat back down. Alone now. My coffee was still warm, but it tasted bitter, like endings always do. And as I watched the people around me go back to their conversations, I realized something important. It wasn't just that our principles clashed. It was that he didn't believe in me the way I believed in us. And when that's the foundation, no love, no matter how sweet it once was, can hold the weight. So I sat there, breathing in the noise, the smells, the heartbreak. And I knew this wasn't the end of me. It was the beginning of something I had to reclaim. My voice, my space, my peace, even if it meant walking away alone. I hadn't planned on seeing him again. After that last conversation at the café, I told myself it was done. I even practiced saying it out loud. We're over, just to make it feel real. But life has a way of dragging you back into unfinished chapters, especially when you're trying so hard to close the book. It started with a text from his sister. We weren't close. Not really. But we'd been friendly over the years. She messaged me out of the blue. "Hey, Alex left his jacket at my place. He says it might still have your spare house key in it. Want me to drop it off?" It was innocent enough. At least, that's what I thought. So I said sure. Told her she could leave it at my place if I wasn't home. I didn't even think twice. When I came back later that evening, the jacket was folded on my porch. It was the navy blue one with the worn leather cuffs. He wore it on our first road trip together. Just seeing it brought a wave of something I didn't want to name. Nostalgia? Regret? Maybe both. I almost left it there overnight. But something about it made me pick it up. I brought it inside and threw it on the back of the couch, planning to deal with it later. Only, as I tossed it, I heard a faint clink. Something small. Something metal. I paused, reached into the pocket, and there it was. A tiny black velvet box. For A moment, I just stared at it. My mind went completely blank. I wasn't even breathing. I was frozen in that exact moment of disbelief, holding something that did not belong to this version of our story. I opened it slowly, carefully, like I was afraid it would explode. Inside was a ring, simple, classic, a solitaire diamond, the kind you don't just carry around unless you've made a decision. I sat down hard on the couch, the box still in my hands. My chest was tight, and I felt this weird mix of emotions swirl all at once. Confusion, shock, pain, and something like betrayal, but not quite. He had planned to propose, at some point. Before all of this. Before the café arguments, before the silence, before he told me I was too much. And I didn't know what hurt more. The fact that he once wanted to marry me, or that he changed his mind because I dared to stand up for who I am. I kept turning the box over in my hands, like the answers were hidden under the velvet. My thoughts were racing. Was this from months ago? Was he carrying it that day at the café? Had he changed his mind right there in real time as I challenged him on feminism, or worse? Did he buy it after that first argument, hoping I'd soften myself down into the kind of woman he could handle? I couldn't stop thinking about the moments we shared, the way he used to hold my hand when I spoke at rallies, the way he said he admired my fire, my fearlessness. And now that same fire was what burned us down. I messaged his sister again. Just said, "Tell him I found the ring." It was like lighting a fuse. He called 10 minutes later. No text. No warning. Just a call. I answered. I don't know. Why? Maybe I needed to hear what he'd say. He sounded nervous, hesitant. "So, you found it?" I said. "Yeah, I did." Silence. Then he said, "I was going to propose last month. I had it all planned. I even talked to your dad." That hit me like a punch to the ribs. My dad. He must have known. He said nothing. I asked him. Then what changed? He didn't speak right away. When he did, his voice was low. "You started talking more about what you wanted in life, what you'd never compromise on. Your career, your activism, your voice. I started to realize, I don't know if I'm ready for that." I felt the tears prick my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "You mean you realized I wouldn't shrink for you?" I said. He didn't deny it. He said, "I thought maybe you'd change, that you'd calm down eventually. But I see now. That's who you are. And maybe that's not what I want in a wife." I closed my eyes. Let those words sink in. Not what I want in a wife. Like I was a list he'd been checking off. Like love was conditional on how quiet I could become. I asked him, "So you were going to propose hoping I'd outgrow myself?" He said, "I don't know. I thought maybe love would be enough to figure it out." And that's when it all became clear. Love isn't supposed to be a negotiation of identity. Love doesn't mean swallowing yourself to make someone else feel tall. I told him, "You were right not to propose." Because I wouldn't have said yes. He didn't argue. He just said, "I didn't mean to hurt you." I replied, "But you did. Not because you changed your mind, but because you thought I should change for you." Another pause. Then he said, "What should I do with the ring?" I said, "That's not my decision anymore." And I hung up. I sat there on the couch for a long time after that. The box still on the coffee table, the jacket beside me. Pieces of a future that almost was, and never should have been. It's strange how one small object can hold so much meaning. That ring wasn't just a symbol of love. It was a mirror. A reflection of the version of me he wanted. the version I refused to become. And in a way, finding it gave me closure. Because for the first time, I saw the whole picture. He didn't leave because I was too much. He left because he needed less. Less voice, less challenge, less fire. But I'm not in the business of dimming my light just to make someone else more comfortable in the dark. So I put the ring back in the box, closed it gently, tucked it back inside the jacket pocket, and the next morning, I left it at his doorstep with a note that said, "You're not the villain, but I'm not your compromise." Then I walked away. No more questions. No more hoping he'll understand. Because I finally do. It wasn't supposed to go down like that. Not in public. Not again. But sometimes life has this cruel sense of timing, where the ugliest conversations unfold under the brightest lights, and the loudest heartbreaks echo in places meant for laughter and comfort. And for us, that place was still the café. He asked me to meet one last time, said he didn't want to leave things the way they were, said it didn't sit right with him that we never got true closure. And I agreed. Not because I expected anything to change, but because I wanted to face the ending without running from it. So I went. I wore neutral colors, no slogans, no statements, just jeans and a plain shirt. I didn't want my appearance to be a distraction. I didn't want him to see me and feel threatened by my confidence. It's wild, isn't it? The way women still dress down their fire to keep the peace. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting at that same table like the universe had bookmarked it for all our unresolved pages. I sat across from him. No hug, no smile, just quiet tension settling between us like dust. He started with small talk. "How's work?" "Fine." "How's your dad?" "He's fine. Everything was fine, but nothing felt fine." Then he leaned forward and said, "I've been thinking about the ring." I stared at him. "What about it?" He hesitated, then said, "I didn't expect you to give it back like that. The note. It got to me." I nodded. Good. That was the point. He looked away, then back. "I've been talking to a friend. He said maybe I overreacted, that I let my ego get in the way." I raised an eyebrow. "A friend had to tell you that?" He sighed. "Look, I know I messed up. I didn't come here to argue. I came to ask, is there any part of you that still wants this to work?" And just like that, everything in me tightened. Because the truth is, yes. There was a part of me, buried under all the hurt and disappointment, that missed him. That missed the way he laughed at my stupid jokes, the way he'd kiss my forehead when I was reading, the way he made me feel safe before all this. But I also remembered the ring in the pocket, the silence after our arguments, the way he flinched when I spoke my mind too freely. So I said, "Wanting something doesn't make it right." He frowned. "So you're saying it's over?" I looked him straight in the eye and said, "It was over the moment you decided my beliefs were a flaw." And that's when his expression changed. The softness disappeared. The regret folded into frustration. He said, "You know what? Maybe I dodged a bullet. Maybe I was right not to marry someone who always needs to be right." And that was it. The moment the whole cafe shifted, a woman at the next table dropped her spoon. Someone 2 tables down stopped mid-conversation. A server froze with a tray in his hand. It was like the air itself froze around us. I stood up. Not loud, not dramatic, just firm. I said, "You didn't dodge a bullet. You missed out on a woman who would have stood by you, fought for you, believed in you, but I won't apologize for refusing to become smaller just to fit into your comfort zone." His voice rose. "This isn't about comfort. It's about reality. You live in some idealistic bubble, always preaching, always correcting. It's exhausting." I laughed once, sharp and bitter. No, what's exhausting is being told to tone myself down just to be loved. By now, all eyes were on us. Someone whispered something I couldn't hear. The barista looked unsure whether to step in or let it unfold. I didn't care. I wasn't going to shrink anymore. I said, "This isn't a debate. This is me saying goodbye." He stood too, his face flushed, voice tight. "You always think you're so noble. But maybe, just maybe, not everyone wants to date a walking TED Talk, and that should have hurt. But it didn't. Because I realized in that moment, I'd been trying to build a future with someone who only loved the quiet version of me, the agreeable version. The version who smiled and nodded and made space for his pride, and I was done with that. I turned to walk away, and someone near the counter clapped. Just one person. A slow, awkward clap, but others joined in, some in support, some just reacting to the tension. It wasn't about sides. It was about witnessing someone finally draw the line. I didn't turn back. I walked out into the sunlight, heart pounding, hands shaking, but not from fear, from release. Because finally, I'd said everything I needed to say, without apology, without filtering myself to make it easier for someone else to hear. I don't know what he did after that. I didn't block his number. I didn't send a final text. I just let go. Let go of the fantasy. The version of him I'd built in my head. The story where love fixes everything, even fundamental differences. That cafe had seen the beginning and the end of us. Same table, same two people. But this time, only one of us left stronger, and it was me. It had been 5 months. 5 months since I walked away from that cafe table. 5 months since the last word was spoken between us. 5 months of silence. Not the bitter kind, not the angry kind, but the quiet you find after a storm has passed. The kind of silence that lets you finally hear yourself think again. At first, the healing felt like nothing was happening. I kept waiting for some big wave of relief, some cinematic moment where I'd suddenly feel whole again. But healing doesn't show up all at once. It's slow. It's messy. It comes in the form of small wins. Waking up without checking your phone, driving past the cafe without flinching, deleting old photos without your heart cracking in half. I focused on me. I went back to the gym, took on a new project at work, said yes to dinners I'd usually cancel. I laughed again. Not because I was over it, but because I was finally remembering who I was before I started editing myself for someone else. And then, one night, just when I thought the past had fully settled, my phone buzzed. It was him. I froze. It wasn't his name that appeared. He wasn't saved in my contacts anymore. It just said unknown number, but I knew it was him. You can feel certain people in your bones, even when you try to forget them. His message was short. Just 3 lines. "Hey, I hope you're well. I've been thinking about everything. I wanted to say, I'm sorry." That was it. No explanation, no essay, no drama. Just a quiet apology drifting into my life like a paper boat after the flood. I sat there, staring at the screen. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I didn't feel that ache I used to feel when I saw his name. And that's how I knew I was no longer in love. But I was human. Curious. So I read the message again. And then I did something I never thought I would. I didn't reply. Not out of anger, not out of pride, but because I didn't need anything else from him. I didn't need closure. I didn't need one final talk. I didn't even need the apology. Not really, because I had already done the work. I had cried the tears and asked the hard questions and picked up the broken pieces. I had stitched myself back together in the dark, without his help, without his voice, without his validation. And maybe, just maybe, that was the real closure. A few days later, I ran into his sister at the bookstore. She spotted me from across the aisle and smiled. Walked over, gave me a hug. "You look good," she said. I smiled back. "Thanks, I feel good." She hesitated, then said, "He's not doing great, to be honest." I didn't know how to respond to that. Sympathy tugged at the edges of my chest, but I didn't let it take over. I just nodded. She went on. "He told me what happened, about the ring, the café, everything. He said you really scared him, in a good way, like you held up a mirror. That hit me, because maybe that's what love sometimes does. Not just the soft parts, but the hard truths, the uncomfortable reflections, the push to grow, even when we're not ready." I told her, "We weren't right for each other. That's all." And she nodded. "Still, I think he regrets it." I said, "Regret isn't the same as change." We hugged goodbye, and I left with a book in my hand and a calm in my heart that I hadn't felt in a long time. That night, I thought about everything we went through. The good moments, the hard ones, the things I said, the things I didn't. And I felt proud, because I didn't let pain make me bitter. I didn't let heartbreak make me smaller. I let it shape me, sharpen me, show me what I will never compromise on again. And maybe he did grow, in his own way, in his own time. Maybe he'll treat the next woman better. Maybe he'll understand her instead of trying to reshape her. But that's not my responsibility anymore. My only job now is to live truthfully, to speak freely, to love myself with the same intensity I used to pour into others. And I do. I love the woman I've become through it all, the one who knows her worth, the one who walks away when she's being diminished, the one who doesn't need apologies to heal. Because sometimes, the most powerful closure doesn't come from the person who hurt you. It comes from the moment you realize they can't take anything from you anymore. No apologies, no regrets, just freedom.